Good morning. Continuing our journey in Hemshech Samach Vav. We are on page 52. 52. And to explain our connection with the Ratzon Elyon, with God's will and desire, on either action-based, or we share ideas, or we collaborate. But to connect to our desire is not a common language. But when it talks about godliness, because godliness is so beyond us, so God's desire becomes plays a tremendous role. That's why Keser is so prominent in Kabbalah and Chassidus. The whole Ayin Beis was built around Keser. If you remember, the beginning starts with Keser, the interface. And here again, Keser, Rotzen. Because what's happening here is that Rotzen becomes, as he says right in the beginning of Ayin Beis, is the first step of interface is that someone wants to have a relationship with you. Now, again, we take that for granted, perhaps, in our personal human relationships. But if there's no will, the rest doesn't follow. And especially when it comes to God, who doesn't have to do anything if he doesn't want to. So will becomes the first platform, so to speak, of expression. We will talk about pleasure and tainuk, how it connects to Ratzon later. But for now, so Ratzon becomes this interface, and by us connecting to his will, we're connecting with God. Now, will itself, we've been learning the outer will is more the means, the creation of the world, the creation of existence. And then there's the pnimius Ratzon, the intention behind the will, the pnimius of the desire. Why does he want it? When I say why, I don't mean the reason why, but the driving force behind it is not just because he wants a piece of art or he wants a world. The driving force is because he wants a dir b'tachtenim. The Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu desire to have a home, a divine home in this lowest of worlds through Torah and mitzvahs. So Torah and mitzvahs as the connection to the pnimius haratzon. Just summing up a bit what we've been learning. So he says, to understand this, let's understand the concept of Oir, that all the Giluyim, Elyenim, all the revelations are called Oir, not Shefa, not flow Shefa, but Oir. Why Oir? Because Oir indicates on a critical piece in this interface that we'll soon learn about, which is going to connect to Ratzon. And what is that critical piece? That on one hand, Oir is not the Ma'ir, it's not the source. It's only a reflection of the source. So it captures the idea of the infinite distance between God and everything else in existence. On the other hand, Oir is nothing outside of the source, meaning it's not a foreign entity. It's not an outside external garment. It's a garment that extends from, it's a reflection of the source. So sunlight is not the sun, but it's light of the sun in the example that he gave. So it's not Shefa, and it's also not Ilav Olol, even though all the levels in the Shtalshlus are connected to one another like links in a chain, and the lower level of a higher level, of a higher dimension, becomes the higher level of a lower dimension, like links, and yet, it's still not like Ilav Olol, Mahus le Mahus. It's not like cause and effect, where the cause is part of the effect. The effect is from the very matter of the cause. Here it's only a reflection. And he gives sunlight as one example, Er HaNefesh, the vitality that comes from the soul, is a second example. But it's a reflection. And he compares it to a levush, a garment. But not completely, because a garment, an actual garment, is completely separate from the body. But then there's kahadein kamtza, the levushe menei bay. Like certain creatures, that their levush is menei bay, that their garment or their shell comes from their very body. So kamtza, I looked it up again. In some places they translate snail, sometimes turtle, but I see also grasshopper and insect is even more common translation. So I haven't really gotten to the bottom of which is I don't know if there's a definitive translation. In the Tanya, chapter 21, he brings this as well. So there, Tanya Mavueres brings different interpretations. But the bottom line relevant to us is, forget about which creature it is that it's a garment. So it is a shell, it's a garment, but it's a garment that's attached and comes from the very body. It's not like a jacket that a human being puts on. It's more like the shell of a snail, or I guess also certain insects. Not the wing, they're encasing. I'm not sure what it's called in a grasshopper. Their outer layer is part of their very body. So so on one hand, it's like a lavush, and on the other hand, it's an extension of the etzem.
Exoskeleton.
So a skeleton, okay, fine. So this is just the beginning of the discussion. Now he's going to continue. So I'm going to continue now, paragraph 2, second paragraph on page 52. The pages can be found at samachvav.com. And now he's going to use an example, like he says. He's going to give an example from Psari Echza, from our flesh we behold, something that we can relate to. So it's not flesh as in flesh, physical flesh, but he means from our being, from our lives. We're going to give an example. Yuvan will understand this. What's the Psari Echza? Me'esis hamachshava. So he's going to discuss now the process of how intelligence manifests. So briefly, as a little intro, everything is Eris and Kalim. An idea in your mind is an Eir. It's an energy. It's an idea. The Kalim are the letters and the words that express that idea. On a page, the same idea. The letters on the page or the words on the page is the Kali, the Oisius. The idea or the inspiration or the sentiment that's being expressed is the Eir. So he's going to talk about this in the context that we just discussed. Eir and Kali is machshava. We'll see that Eir and Kali are very much connected to each other. Like the garment that is not a detached garment, it's a garment, but it comes from the Eir itself. And then there's, like I explained yesterday, for example, words that you write down on a piece of paper, they also have an idea in them, but they're more disconnected from the idea, especially from the person that's conveying the idea, than the letters in thought. So he's going to discuss this now in this context, because let's just go back to Hashem. Hashem is beyond, God is beyond definition, beyond expression. So is God Eir or Keli? The answer is neither of the two. Because even Eir is also an expression. Eir is an expression. Keli is the parameters of the expression. This is going to be very important. Etzem is neither Eir nor Keli. But he manifests in the Eir is the expression, like we discussed. Eir Ein Sof. God is expressing himself. Divine consciousness. What are the parameters of that expression? That's the Kelim. So we say Eir HaChachma. Eir is the divine energy within Chachma. The Chachma part is that it's Chachma, not Bina. And that's how we distinguish the two. So he's going to discuss this now in the context of Oisius HaMachshava. But interestingly,
Eir is closer to the atom than a Keli, correct?
Yeah, closer in the sense it's more revealing. Closer, they're really equally close, because Atzmus is beyond Eir and Keli equally. But Eir is more of if you have only letters, for example, or only a body, Kiv Gufa B'lei Nishmasa. So you have a creation, you have letters, but it's hollow. It's like think of garments without a body, or in this case, a body without a soul. So essentially, Eir is the energy behind it, and the Keli is the parameters or the structure, if you wish. So he's not going to explain. The thing is, there's a long parenthesis that goes from the first, literally the first line of this new paragraph on page 52, and ends on the third line of the next page. So it's a long parenthesis, which is very relevant to our discussion, but it's like there are two tracks that the Rebbe Rashab is going to be discussing now, and I want to keep it organized. So I was thinking I would just read the first line, skip to after the parentheses, just a few lines, and then go back to the parentheses, if you don't mind. So he says, Al derech moshma psari echza, yuven zeh me'esis hamachshava. What's esis hamachshava? Is the letters which you think an idea. So thought also has letters. It's not tangible letters like speech, and definitely not as tangible and palpable as letters that are in written letter, but it's still letters, because every idea has to have letters. Like if you think 2 + 2 = 4, even if I didn't articulate it, 2 plus 2 equals 4 are letters of machshava. That's called Esis HaMachshava. And the same thing, every idea has its parameters. One idea is different than another idea. What distinguishes them? Not just the concept, it's also their expression, the terms that you use to explain it. If you think about water, it's different than when you think about fire. So to skip straight to the third line on page 53, just to show the flow, and then I'm going to go back. So it says like this. So he says, Esis HaMachshava, dehine Esis HaMachshava, harihem nimshachim memuchus atzmus hanefesh. Where do these Esis come from? They're coming from the Muhus Atzmus HaNefesh. They're not created on their own. The Nefesh has in it is what we call is Mole Eisius, like he says, Kameshikosav Bekisve Arizal, like it's written in the writings of the Arizal. The Nefesh Malaya Eisius. That's an expression. The Nefesh, the spirit, and he gives the source for it in Eitz Chaim, is filled with letters. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean there are a bunch of letters running around inside your soul. It means letters are not created at a later stage. They originate from the very soul itself. Letters, think of letters as channels of expression. You know, just like you have, let's say, a projector of light, of white light going onto a screen. So it's just plain white light. You put a film of letters, then you'll see letters of light, right, on the screen. So where do those letters come from? So when it comes to it, both the nefesh and also Lamaila, they're not coming from nowhere. They originate in the very nefesh itself. That's where the letters originate from. So in other words, when a child learns to speak, it's not being downloaded speech from somewhere. The nefesh had letters already, but the child needed to learn how to articulate them. That's why it doesn't take long to learn how to speak. Because if you think about it, how can a child that can't speak at all suddenly speak? Doesn't take, not overnight, but after a little while, the child speaks, and then a year or two later, a child can be speaking very well. Because the nefesh has letters in it that haven't been activated, so to speak, but they're there. So when you say Esis HaMachshava, he's saying they're nimshachim, where they come from, Hus Atzmus HaNefesh. So I'm going to continue reading here till I'll go to the end of the paragraph, then I'm going to go back. So he says, Uksiv, Vahi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. The pasuk says that when Hashem breathed a neshama, a soul, into the human body, into the offer, min ha'adama, the dust of the earth that he shaped into a body, he then put a nefesh into it. What is nefesh? Says the Targum Onkelos, leruach Mamalala, to a spirit that speaks. Mamala means to speak. So nefesh chaya, you could just mean a living soul. The Targum teaches a speaking soul, a speaking spirit. Pirush, shekoyach echad mikeches hanefesh, one of the faculties of the soul, hu koyach hadibur, v'koyach hamachshava. So in other words, dibur hamachshava, even though they are called garments, but their power to speak and the power of thought comes from the nefesh. They're not outside garments. He's leading up to like the garment that comes from the very body of the entity, like the kamsa, like the snail. So here too, it is a keli, it is a koyach, the koyach of dibur. Oisius are kelim, as we're going to learn more in the parentheses, but they're not outside kelim. They're coming from the nefesh itself. So in other words, it's not like the nefesh is just pure light, and then somebody from outside brings kelim. Let's say I would have, a lot of light, and then someone else builds instruments that can channel that light. That's not the case. Those instruments, what we call letters, actually also coming from the nefesh. And that's why it brings the Targum Onkelos, because the nefesh and nefesh chaya, it's a nefesh that speaks. It's not just like an instrument that comes from the outside. It's the nefesh itself. Part of its power is ability to speak or ability to think. Basically, oisius. And that ability to communicate and speak is coming from atzmus hanefesh, not from an external power. But then when it extends and expresses itself, the power of thought to actually think, nasis mechshava, but tzuras esis mechinas geshem. So initially, it's just a koyach. It's a power to express yourself. And that power is the esis within the nefesh. Except when you actually activate a thought, then the thought manifests and generates actual letters. Machshava b'tzuras esis, you actually have letters of thought. B'chinas geshem, in a far more tangible and a tangible and palpable way. She'ena me'erech mahus nefesh klal. That's not me'erech the mahus nefesh, because the nefesh is completely devoid of any type of defined structure. She'en sham hagbola v'ischalkus, because the nefesh does not have a finite elements and distinction. Ve'ena be'erech mahus zeh klal k'machshava gashmis. And way it's in the nefesh, it's not at all the same mahus as it is k'machshava gashmis, as a physical thought manifests. And nevertheless, where does the physical thought come from? When it's nimshach, it's not coming from elsewhere. So it's literally like the mashal that he gave earlier of the reflection of the sun in its source. So what did he say there? The same thing. Light of the sun is not the sun, because you can't compare the sun, different muhus, but it's coming only from the sun. The light of the sun doesn't come from elsewhere. So what you have here is an ultimate paradox that is going to ultimately help us explain how we can relate to the divine that's completely beyond existence. Because if you talk about etzem, atzmus muhus, beyond existence, but he manifested in Oir. And Oir is a reflection of him, yet it's not him. So you have now like a type of interface that on one hand, it's nothing but him because it's expressing the divine, but you can't compare it to the etzem itself. So what he said earlier about light, now he applied to Esis HaMachshava. So again, in the nefesh, it all originates in the nefesh, but when it manifests in actual thought, and definitely speech and so on, and action, it has its tangible structure, and yet it's originating from the etzem of the nefesh. That's in B'Psari Echza, an example from our lives, in our experience, to the idea that we're speaking about Oir. Now, what we did not do is the parentheses. In the parentheses, he's going to elaborate a lot more. What exactly is Oir? What is the Keli? Is it the letters? Is it the idea? But that's why I didn't want to read the parentheses before I read this. So I wanted to first establish what he comes to say. The parenthesis is going to now dissect this more. Now keep in mind, this whole piece is from the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, and the parentheses is the Rebbe Rashab's explanation of the Alter Rebbe. But let me stop for any questions, and we may not even have time to go to the parentheses, to be honest. I see that it's late, but I'll stop for any questions on what I just reviewed, and then if need be, we'll do it tomorrow. We'll go back to the parentheses. Any questions?
With all the adventure that you have of oil, it's not the atom. Not
No.
at all. It's a creation, if you're talking about Hashem.
Yeah, I like to explain it always, because when you're talking about Atzmos, built in Metzias Nimtza, you're talking about a reality that is completely something that's nothing in common with us. We are a Metzias Nimtza. We are a defined entity. So the question ultimately is, if you didn't have Oir, how do we connect to Atzmos? So yeah, you could say Kol Yochel, that God invested himself in mitzvahs. You do a mitzvah, you connect to Atzmos. But there'd be no way to understand it. There'd be no way to us to internalize it and integrate it. With Oir, what you get is the benefit. You get something that is nothing but Atzmos, but on the other hand, it's not Atzmos itself, because it's only a reflection of it. And it's we're going to learn a lot more about Oir. But right now, suffice it with that. So yes, so essentially, you want to have something that is relating to us, but it's still a divine expression. Oir Ein Sof is perfect, because Oir Ein Sof is not Atzmos, but it's also a pure reflection of Atzmos. It's nothing else. But like sunlight doesn't have any other elements in it. it's expression of the sun, but it's not the sun itself. And in
I
machshava, the Asius machshava is the same idea. It originates in the atzmus hanefesh, but it's not the atzmus hanefesh.
But it's
the
part.
only thing I think to emphasize here that all of this meshalim it's correct, like oil shemesh, machshava, but by Hashem the oil is completely has nothing to do with him. It's a ritzoni. He created the oil.
Yeah, but once you're correct in the initial state, but once he created it in a way that it should reflect him. Keep that in mind.
Rabbi Jacobson,
didn't have to-
Rabbi Tektiel said something earlier that the ore is closer to Etzem than Keli, but I thought the whole thing was
And
that
I
the
said,
source,
and I corrected and
source
said
of
it's not
Keli-
correct.
God,
And I
okay,
said
because
that's
the
not
source of
correct.
Keli
It's
is
not
much-
closer.
correct. Because Keli has its source in a much higher
when you
level.
say,
than-
well, no, 1 second. If it's more revealing of Etzem, yes, the Ur is more of a revealer than a Keli is. But is it closer fundamentally? Atzmus is beyond both and created both. So in that sense.
But
And
then
this is not
Keli
also
had
a
its-
competition. There are things
No,
that a
of course.
Keli expresses from the Etzem that Ur doesn't express. But that's not what we're discussing right now.
I understand, but I
Let's-
thought the Keli had its source at a much higher level than the
Yeah,
ore.
but that's not the discussion. I don't even want to go there because
Okay,
it's just going to
okay.
confuse matters. That's not what he wants to say here. Here he
Okay.
wants to speak about how the etzem manifests in some form of expression that we can hold on to. Yes,
So-
it's a good discussion, but I don't want to go there because it's a completely different discussion. And it's not what he wants to say here in Samach Vav. In other places, he talks about this. We will talk about this later, but not now.
But a ray of the sun is the sun. I mean, it originated in the sun.
But it's not the sun. It's just not the sun. The sun is made up of materials that the ray of the sun is not made up. We
Okay.
discussed this yesterday more at length.
I have to go back to yesterday. I didn't
Any
listen.
reflection is always a reflection. Is the reflection of a face in a mirror the face? On
Okay,
one
I
hand,
I see
it's
your
nothing
point.
but the face, but it's not the actual face.
It isn't. Yeah. Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
But it's expressing the original. Me'ein hamoel.
Okay, so that's exactly what the purpose of Eid is to express the divine will, or the divine intentions, and the divine energy, the divine consciousness. Eid Ein Sof, if you speak to Eid Ein Sof, all it talks about is God. It doesn't have any other agenda. It has no yesh. It has no ego. All it is like sunlight. All I can tell you is about the sun. That's what Eid Ein Sof is. It's expressing godliness.
I have
Is
a
it
question.
atzmus? Okay, so, but here the point is not so much focusing. It's both. There's two parts here. It's not etzem, but it's an expression of the etzem. Okay.
Me'ein.
Jeez.
He doesn't use that word, if you're interesting, by the way, here. He doesn't speak about me'ein ha'moed because that's not what he wants to say right now here. But it's correct. It is me'ein ha'moed. That's true.
I have a question about understanding what osios means. I understand it means letters, but I guess it essentially means a compartmentalization. Because, for example,
I would not call letters. I'd call it channels of expression.
okay, thank you. Yeah,
But letters
because
are channels of expression as well.
yes, for sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a better, definitely, because
The word
it seems-
oisias, by the way, comes from the word osa boiker, that the morning has arrived. It's a channel of, it's a distribution channel, basically.
yeah. Okay,
So us, think of us as a channel.
almost like
Like
a
a
cob
pipe.
in a sense. Yeah.
We also
In the-
have to remember that when we're speaking about that the oil is a reflection of the moel, that by Atmos, there are many, many other things that we even not talking, we
Yeah,
don't
but
know
that's not the
about it.
point in this mimer here. That's discussed in other mimarim. I keep saying, I understand because you've learned that in Chassidus, so you're bringing it into the picture. But it's correct what you're just saying. That number one, the Ur is not the Etzem. Number two, the Etzem is a lot more than Ur. I mentioned yesterday, Right? That's what you're referring to. So it's correct. That the etzem has a lot more to it than oir. That is accurate, yes. But I'm trying to stick to what he wants to come here is explain how ultimately we can connect to something that's not mamish etzem, but it's also nothing but etzem, as we're going to learn more about.
Quantum.
Okay, good. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you.
I know it's a shorter class, but tomorrow I'll try to compensate. So we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph 53, but we did skip the parentheses, the bottom of page 52, which I will go back to in the next class tomorrow. So we'll stop here.